Welcome back to Sephardic U Presents. It's been a little while since we've been with you. We've had a short break for Passover, and we hope everyone had a meaningful and restful holiday. But we're back, and today we're diving into fascinating Parashat Tazria. I'm your host, Nathaniel Poole, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Sam Ben Diane. We've got a lot to talk about today, especially since we've had that brief pause, and we're so excited to hear your thoughts on this week's parasha as well. For those of you joining us live, we want this to be an open conversation. You're part of the discussion, so jump in with any questions, insights, or comments as we go. Whether you're familiar with the laws of purification or this is new to you, there's something we can all learn together today. So, Sam, let's get it started. And for those of you coming back after the Passover break, what do we need to know about Parashat Tazria? How does it tie into what we've learned in the previous weeks?
That's a great question, Nathaniel. It's good to be back after a little break. So as we dive into Parashat Tazria, the focus is really on the laws of purification. This parasha talks about tzara'at, which, while often translated as leprosy, is actually a broader skin condition in the Torah tied to spiritual impurity. The interesting thing here is that purification isn't just about physical cleanliness. It's deeply tied to spiritual and emotional balance. The Torah tells us that if someone had tzara'at, they had to go to the priest for an examination. If they were found to be impure, they couldn't remain in the camp. They had to go through a process of purification, and that involved some intense rituals, including sacrifices. Now, it's easy to think, well, that doesn't really apply to us today, but I think it's interesting how many of these concepts can still resonate with us.
Mm-hmm.
So, Nathaniel, what do you think? Does the idea of spiritual impurity or purification have any relevance in our world today? I know a lot of people might not immediately see the connection, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, that's a great point, Sam. And I think a lot of people would read this parsha and wonder how it fits into their lives, especially today. But also do think there's something powerful here. When we talk about tzara'at, it's like you said, it's about more than just a physical condition, more than just the leprosy. The concept in the Torah often connects with physical state, with someone's spiritual or moral state. Mm-hmm. So while we may not deal with tzara'at in literal sense, we do go through times where we feel off spiritually or emotionally. And that's where the purification comes in. We might not have rituals like sacrifices, but think about moments of reflection or self-improvement, or even acts of kindness that help us find spiritual clarity. And mm-hmm. we may not have the priests to go to, but we have our communities, our families, Sephardic U, and our own practices get back on track. But enough of my thoughts. Let's open it up. Let's hear from our audience. How do you interpret the idea of purification in your own life or in our lives? And anyone want to share how they feel about the connection between the spiritual and our physical state?
Well, when you are not feeling well, when you are sick, really you get a little bit forgetting God. Some people may feel, why me? Or really be overwhelmed by the pain and therefore may alienate themselves. And therefore, that is why this purification was good, not only to the body, but to the soul, to restore. And that is why they would bring a sacrifice to restore their link to God.
There's a really interesting point here with the modern Western medicine, which the modern medicine has disconnected the spiritual from the physical, right? The whole, or one of the main principles of Western medicine is don't ask me to do too much, give me a pill and get rid of my problem.
That's a great point.
And
The
what does that
dependence
mean?
becomes on the doctor or the medicine rather than God.
Right? And it's all physical. It's all physical. If doctors can't see something, it doesn't exist. Everything has to be observable. This is according to the scientific method. But if you think about it, this is a ridiculous statement. If something doesn't exist, if something's not visible, it doesn't exist. I mean, much of reality is invisible. And yet, this has completely been ignored by modern medicine. And so people just they don't want to transform themselves. They want to keep doing whatever they're doing. But hey, I got this problem and just give me a pill so I can solve it. So, I've always had a problem with this. And it's because it's disconnecting the spiritual from the physical. And as we know, the spiritual has great influence on the physical. And
Mhm.
now people are saying, oh, stress causes all kinds of problems. Loneliness affects your immune system, so on and so forth. So really, there is a connection, no matter how much we choose to ignore it.
Well, look at the physical detail they go into in this Parashat Tazria. I
Mhm.
mean, the yellow hair, whether the hair in the
Mhm.
abscess or affected area is white or yellow or black,
Mhm.
whether there are white streaks. There's so many um, determinations or observations they're making. And I think back, they had hundreds and thousands of years to think this through and observe and try different things. Um, it's it's very interesting because there's really they don't talk about the cure here, right? In the
Correct.
parashat, it's the what's wrong. It's the observation, and then
Mhm.
clean it or go into seclusion or go into quarantine for 7 days. If that doesn't work, another 7 days.
Yeah,
And it
there's
was
no
Well,
there's no
as
medicine, right?
what we have think we have lost sight of the fact that the patient does not go to see a doctor, he goes to the priest. There is a
yeah.
close association. The whole thing of Tazria and Metzora, it's always the priest. There is never an intervention by a doctor because they existed, the Rofe existed. Excuse me. In here, it is the priest. It shows the close association between the physical and the spiritual mind. In Morocco, that's how it started. The hospital where really it's always within the church, within the synagogue. In Morocco, every synagogue had several rooms for people who were sick. We believed in the spiritual healing from which will come the physical one.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and what's actually sort of continuing on that line of thought. So the books I've read on very ancient history, and we're talking Sumerian civilization and such, the science was in the domain of the priesthood. The original priests were the ones who observed the stars. They were astronomers. Astrology, though not as we know it today, was also part of that. It was more, the astrology of today is much less scientific, much more sort of witch-like, kind of sorcery-like. The Back in those days, it was different, and it's amazing to see how, as time has gone on, the scientific component of it has split off from the priesthood, and then eventually they started to fight with each other. But originally, there was no conflict between religion and science, none whatsoever. It
Hmm.
actually just represented knowledge, period. Whether
Yeah,
spiritual, physical, everything was connected.
that's
And
right. I think
yeah,
it's a great healing, right? I'm not against modern medicine by any means. I mean, we're living longer, we're living uh, some better, but we've also picked up a lot more addictions and a lot more
yeah,
dependency on it, where maybe this spiritual and mental well-being and connection would certainly help not just improve the lives, but become a remedy to a lot of these things. because
Yeah.
none of this is done quickly in Tazria and the Parashat.
No.
And isn't it funny because our antibiotics today, how long do you take them for?
Mm-hmm.
5, 7, 10 days.
Yeah.
Tazria, everything is 7 days. It's right in that,
Mm-hmm.
this is the
Yeah.
time they observed that it took the body to heal.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Cycles, many cycles in nature. So I guess they knew about these. But here's an interesting question. Why did Hashem allow modern medicine to develop if it was in essence a separation, right? Some kind of a incorrect separation. And I think the answer to that is chesed. It's a measure of compassion that if we have a problem in our genetics, for instance, this is something that gets passed down from father to son. Eventually, you get to a point where there's not much you can do about it. You're born with a condition. It's very difficult for a person to reverse something that they're born with. So then the world of medicine can offer compassion in the sense that, okay, if you can't beat this on your own, here's some help, here's a medicine. But I don't think it's ever intended to be a replacement where you can just let go of your burdens and say, I'm just going to rely on pills. And
I see a juxtaposition here as well because the chokhmah, the intelligence that God's given us to allow us to create these medicines and drugs, or to realize, for poison ivy, you can use whatever, aloe vera, or there's a counter to it. And that becomes, well, how do we preserve this? Well, put it in a pill case. Well, how does that last longer? So it can be shelved. And so I think it all ties in. Like you said, there has to be a balance in that. I think mental health is much worse today than it was 20
absolutely.
years ago, 10 years ago, and definitely, back, because you had community, you had somebody to talk to, you had a built-in therapy when you were
No,
around family and when you're around community.
and not just that, but God was present, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
you can see, I've
Mm-hmm.
seen this, God was present in people's minds, is what I want to say. And
Mm-hmm.
I've seen this in my life since, so I moved to the United States about almost 50 years ago. And I've been able to observe the entire, you might say, decline of the United States. When I got here, it was a different country. And I saw slowly how truth was taken from us, God was taken from us, religion, family, even our own identities, even our own genders recently. And we've been down a path where we have divorced ourselves from our creator. And when you do something like this, there's nothing that can replace it. Now, they offered medicine as a fake substitute, which lasts for a little while, but eventually it goes bad. And how does it go bad? We see it today. The opioid addiction, people running for pills whenever anything bad happens. These people, they have no resilience. They have no mental or spiritual strength because they're missing Hashem. They have no faith because they believe there's nothing out there to help them, which is ridiculous, right? I mean, here we are. We don't know how we got to this world. We don't know where we were before it. We don't know where we're going. We don't know anything. And yet we think that there's nothing else. Right? This is absolutely ridiculous. Yet people have been convinced of this by some, I think, very cynical actors that have decided to put these things in our way. And now everyone's disconnected and they're running for these pills to the point where now everybody's recognizing it. Yeah, this is a problem. I mean, we can't continue like this. So now we're going to go back, in my opinion, to this concept of, yeah, it's, your health is not just your body. You get a disease, you can't just divorce your mind and spirit from it. Everything's connected, and one causes the other. And I think, as an added kind of an addition to this, uh, my father had a very, very high incidence of psychosomatic illness. His brain, his mind was able to make himself sick when he was, and it would happen quickly. My father had, I think, 2 or 3 heart attacks, minor ones, but they all happened after a stressful situation. Usually something with family, there was an argument, whatever, and you would get a heart attack.
Mhm.
And so these things are they're undeniable, right? If you just look at it with objective eyes, you can't divorce one from the other. So I
Well,
think we're going to go back to that.
look,
Well,
I came to this country too almost 50 years ago. Um, and I don't see it that way. I saw it as a great country. I still see it as a great country.
It is,
And
it
I
is.
think the control belongs to you and the ownership belongs to you. How much do you want to make out of this?
mhm.
Now, did I like the Pledge of Allegiance being taken out of school and those things? Those are personal things, but personally to me, yeah, I didn't care for that. I saw that there was a minority leading a majority in some of this and voicing that took away some of these things out of the school. And I think that's had a negative effect, but that didn't reduce my level of observance. Or in fact, I think it made it stronger. In fact, if it was missing out of the schools or they wanted separation from church and state, then that means I go to the synagogue more, I read more, I dedicate myself more. And as it relies or it relates to medicine and what we're talking about here with Parashat Tazria, is same thing, I think. You want the holistic approach, you want full out medical approach, westernized medicine. This country allows us that option to pick or choose one or the other, or a hybrid of both. And I
I
think
think
you have to control it.
I think the Garden of Eden has never changed. Man has always been confronted between the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. Those who have opted for the tree
Mhm.
of knowledge have alienated themselves from the tree of life, I
That's
believe.
very interesting.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, that's an amazing observation,
So
So,
an
man has
analogy.
not man has not changed. And like Pascal said, science without conscience is nothing but ruin of the soul. And
absolutely.
it is not a question of America. It is worldwide. It is human. It is a human condition. There is a Sephardic rabbi of the 15th century in Italy, Rabbi Papo, who said Adam should have chosen of the tree of life. From the tree of life, he would have gained knowledge. By taking the tree of knowledge, he alienated himself from life. And I
Yeah,
think that is why Parashat Tazria, the priest is here. It is the priest whom they consult, not a scientific man as they existed. He goes back to the priest because
and yeah.
he alone is going to keep them
Sorry, go
focused on God. It's okay.
Yeah, listen, I also want to open this up. Ricardo, Mia, Jervis,
Yeah.
Justin, everybody who's online with us now, um, feel free to chime in here or post the question in the chat. We'll read it out and hopefully give an answer.
Sure.
Yeah, and
So I have a
it's
really basic
sorry, go ahead.
question.
Jervis,
Uh,
go on.
yeah, I have a really basic question. In the first few lines, first few verses, it says it gives a difference between the waiting period for a male child born and a female child born.
Yes, very interesting.
What's that about? Does anyone know? Like what's going on there?
Sure, let me repeat it because the volume is very low on your end. Jervis asked at the beginning of Parashat Tazria, why is there such a difference between a woman's impurity? I'm paraphrasing Jervis, so excuse me. Um, why is there such a difference between a woman's impurity time, whether she gives birth to a male child or a female child? Why is there such a difference? It's double. Her impurities double the length of time when she's bears a female, a girl. Would anybody like to?
I have asked this question of several obstetricians who said actually there is no difference in a woman giving. The impurity is the same for men, for a boy, and for a girl. It was in the ancient societies that giving birth to a boy, the impurity at this moment was shorter. It was just out of superstition. And birth, that is why birth was considered as a test of life, really, because like in Morocco, we would say of a pregnant woman, she has one leg in the grave. There were several women who died in childbirth. And therefore, it was a situation of danger. And the 40 was the number that was benefic because it was the 40 days of conception. And so it was just out of superstition that they made the woman to be impure longer for a girl. Scientifically, the doctors have told me this is totally incorrect.
Well, I wonder if it's, just the only thing that really occurs to me is physiologically, the woman is more complicated than the man. And that's the only thing that occurs to me. Man is very simple, generally speaking, right? I mean, not even just physically, mentally, we also see that men are simpler, they're less subtle, very generally speaking here, right? But women have a much more complex system. Obviously, they have their entire reproductive system to actually be able to nurture a child and then eventually give birth to it. And I wonder if maybe it's because of this that it takes longer for the impurity to go away. I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of.
It's been a point of question for years, and I'd love if somebody listening to this could give us an answer as well and post it in the comments. That'd be great. I'd love to know the difference too. Why? One way to look at it too is maybe it's got something to do with the circumcision time and point of recovery. So it's shortened for the boy, but still the numbers don't add up. But don't look at it that the woman has a longer time. What if we were to look at it that the boy's time is shortened? So, or giving birth to boys shortened. I don't know. I'd love to hear from anybody, any of our listeners, or if somebody has a nice explanation to it. Good question, Jervis.
Put a comment on our video.
Excellent.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I have a commentary from Rabbi Shammah, which is very good, and I would love to share it.
Sure.
It has to go with, it is connected to the Ugarit society. And Israel always, the Torah is not written out of a void. It takes into consideration all the contemporary civilizations and culture to which the Hebrews were exposed. So it has to take some of these elements and just sanitize them. And that is why this Tazria is going to be eliminated after the destruction of the second temple.
What do you mean it's eliminated?
That right of bringing of the woman being impure and bring the sacrifice is going to be eliminated after the destruction of the second temple.
I mean, sacrifices were eliminated completely, right?
Yes, at this moment, especially for the Tazria. It was going to be eliminated by Yehuda HaNasi, the author of the
Amazing
Mishnah.
to step back in time and have that discussion, with the people who wrote this. Jervis, you were starting to say something.
Can you guys hear me now? Is it better?
Much better.
Very good.
Okay, great. I didn't realize my settings were changed. So the reason I asked because it's something we face in India particularly, because here we have very high female infanticide, which means families, especially very traditional families, are incentivized to kill off their girl daughters. So I was wondering if that's something that was a practice that was with local other religions in ancient Israel, where the rule kind of came in so that they could protect the mother and the child for a longer period of time or something like that. I don't know. It was just a wonder that I wanted to entertain if there was any legitimacy, but with that.
Mhm.
What's the reason, if I may ask?
Female infanticide in India. It's because there's a preference for the male child, where the family name is and wealth as well is carried forward through the male line, whereas the woman does not acquire or get bestowed any wealth whatsoever.
Well, we had this policy in China, where today now they have 40 million men who cannot have a match.
Right.
They have
But
killed the
in
women.
China, though, in China, it's because of the one-child policy.
Correct. And
Limited
that
to
is why
one child. Right.
they prefer to have boys rather than girls. And now 40 million men have no women to marry.
Yeah, there's
Because they have
actually
eliminated those women. As for your question, Mr. Ratto, the Torah does not condone infanticide. The women, we have the story of Zelophehad, the 5 girls who came to Moshe Rabbeinu when they are allotting the land of Israel, and they demand that they be given also an inheritance since their father is dead.
Right.
And it was agreed upon. So the Torah has always respected the women. There was no infanticide. And abortion is also condemned in the Orthodox Judaism.
Matter of fact, I don't think there is a single reference anywhere in the Torah of infanticide, is there?
No, actually, that is why the Torah was always talking about the sacrifice to Moloch, how it was an abomination.
Right. There's not, so I know about Moloch, but I don't think there's, and perhaps even in the entire Tanakh, I don't remember there ever being a story where a child was killed, for something like this, which is actually very interesting because, the Torah is that old where these things were happening and it didn't mention anything like this.
No,
if anybody knows of a reference somewhere in the Tanakh, let us know, but I don't recall one.
No, there is no such a thing, because even in the Parashat Kitetse about the stubborn and rebellious child, and they say you can bring him to the elders for him to be killed, the Mishnah said it never occurred. It was just an intervention.
Right, but that was in the case of justice. That's they did something.
But I mean, when he was supposed to be killed for being a rebel, and because it was not acceptable. And there are very strict rules in the Torah, in the Mishnah, about when a boy is declared an adult. It's a very short window, actually 6 months, I believe, between certain signs, certain characteristics. The Torah was very reluctant to put to death, even though we have been declared as the religion of justice. The Torah is the religion of love.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have time for one more question or comment and a little mini discussion.
I had a couple more things, but one, I wanted to go back for a moment about what Madame said regarding the tree of knowledge versus life. And we always talk about how the pursuit of power is the root of probably all the evil that we see. And what is the very famous saying about science? In Latin, scientia est potentia. Right? Science is power. And so this is where we see if you divorce science from morality, it is probably the worst situation you can have. This is what the Nazis did. And so that was one comment. And the other one I have is an interesting curiosity. In the fifth Aliyah, it talks about the color of the hair inside the wound and everything. And we'll see where somewhere, okay, so about 8 lines down, it says, but if the priest finds that the skull affection, okay, yet there is no black hair in it. So did everyone have black hair? What about blonde people?
Correct.
Isn't that interesting?
That's
And
a very good
Yeah, but I
observation.
don't think there were blondes at that time in the Middle East,
well,
in
and
the
then
Babylonian area.
right, and the question is why? Because the Middle East has always been a great crossroads, and you would expect to see anybody there, right? Because just
Well, if you
wait,
look at it as a crossroads, what if you look at it as the beginning of time?
right, and this points to something really interesting because again, in the books I've read on very ancient history, the some of the sources use a specific name for early humans, and they call them the black-headed people. And it's very interesting that we know there was some kind of genetic, or the theories that there was some kind of genetic manipulation, and the people, the Homo sapiens, are referred to sometimes as the black-headed people. And so then the fact that this paragraph is assuming that everyone has black hair is really interesting. And so then where did the blonde people come from, right? Is it another race coming from Scandinavia? It's like a completely different race. And then how could that happen if, this is all one planet? It raises a lot of questions.
That's a great observation.
Wanted to
Well,
bring that up.
I have a personal experience with our son Michael, the second born. We lived in the Philippines. He was platinum blonde, and suddenly he had a bald spot. I took him to the dermatologist, and he had injection in the scalp, everything, nothing was working. And I came to the Parashat Tazria. I said, I can only get the answer there. And even though he was a platinum blonde boy, the first hair that grew was black. And I knew that he was healed then.
Wow.
We tried everything. He suffered terribly. They were doing injection in the scalp every week, every other week. They did ultraviolet rays. They did everything. Nothing could cure it. And I was terrified because of the leprosy, which existed in the Philippines. And that's what I was fearing. And finally, desperate, I went back to Tazria and I was looking for that black hair, and it came. And then the hair turned again platinum blonde.
Okay, that was my next question. Wow, so the hair came out black first and then it turned back into
There was a tiny black hair, and my heart soared with joy because I knew then that he was healed. And then the hair became platinum blonde as at the beginning.
wow.
Mhm.
I was afraid that we weren't going to have much to talk about in this
I
parasha.
know, because it's such a short parasha as well. In
And
fact,
it's like,
it's doubled
wow.
up. But as usual, what a great discussion.
Yeah.
We're so glad to be back with all of you after this Passover break. And today's conversation about Tazria has been so insightful. And whether you're thinking about the connection between physical and spiritual healing, the role of community and purification, or just reflecting on how these ancient laws can inform our lives today, I hope you're walking away with something meaningful.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much to everyone who joined us live today. Your participation is what makes these conversations so special. And we'll be back next week with another parasha. And we encourage you to keep the discussion going on with your friends, families, and community. And before we wrap up, Sam, any final thoughts?
No, just think about, especially for those, since we have such an influence from Western medicine, think about bringing the spiritual back and reconnecting it. And I think that it'll be a very rewarding experience.
Exactly. And to everyone listening, thank you for being part of the Sephardic U community. Be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to the podcast for all future episodes. Until next time, Shavua Tov.
Well, everybody.
What?